Follow your heart, trust your gut instincts. You have to express your feelings. These are all sayings that have had a huge influence on our upbringing. But then on the other hand, we're told that being emotional is something that practically makes our input on any rational subject practically invalid. So, which is the truth? Well, the truth is that our emotions are a super high-tech, ultra-sensitive signaling system that actually delivers really important neurochemicals to our body in just the right dose, just when we need them. Well, sometimes. The other truth is that we really need to regulate the system. And this is something that usually only happens through maturity. We all see kids who get emotional and yell and scream and cry when they don't get their way, or pout and really sulk and stomp their feet when they're sad or when they're angry. And this really doesn't work in any kind of social sense in the world that we live in. So, yes, our emotions are high-tech, super sensitive signaling system that delivers neurochemicals in precisely the right dose when we need them, when that system is highly regulated. And the regulation of that system is something that generally only happens from training. It only happens from experience, from watching other people that we model off, and from taking time out when we are not emotional to actually look at our emotional reactions and learn about what it is that they're telling us. I like to compare this to the story of the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise, which is our thinking, prefrontal cortex, problem-solving brain, works slower than our emotional brain, which is very, very fast to be triggered, lightning fast, in fact, when we have an emotional reaction. This slower part of our brain really needs to take the time to examine our emotional reactions when they happen, what triggers them, and learn to regulate that system better if we really want to have a hope at being well socialized in this world that we live in. So I'd like to just at the beginning of this unit give a few reasons why this system of ours needs so much work at regulating, and reasons why sometimes our emotions really can lead us astray and in the wrong direction. The first is that most of us just don't understand our emotions, and we've really never been taught how to manage them. We are taught when we're children not to behave in that way, that it's selfish and bad for us to yell and scream and be demanding when we want something, that we should act like more of a big girl. We should put our big girl's panties on and grow up instead of being sad and sulky and stomping our feet when we're disappointed. This isn't really very useful because it's not really teaching children why they're feeling what they're feeling, that what they're feeling is probably normal, but that they need to learn more adult ways to deal with those emotions if they want to be listened to and if they want to be taken seriously. Okay, the second reason why our emotional system can go wrong and why we need to take the time out to learn to regulate it is something that scientists call our brains being faulty simulators. This really just means that basically we're very, very bad at imagining how things we're anticipating doing are likely to make us feel. The most famous example that's often quoted by scientists is that we think that winning the lottery is going to make us happy, where statistics show really clearly that it almost certainly won't. Many things that we do every day in an attempt to make ourselves comfortable and secure actually end up being counterproductive. So this is called our brains being faulty simulators. One reason for this is that we have two completely separate nervous systems in our body. We have what's called a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. One system is called rest and digest, and it's the system that takes care of us and nourishes us and is working when we don't feel threatened and when we feel we're secure in our environment. That's our parasympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic nervous system gets switched on at the slightest sign of threat or danger, and it's often called fight or flight. And it is a completely different system that responds to things and thinks and behaves in a very, very different way as soon as we become defensive because we feel threatened. One interesting thing to note about this is that our sympathetic nervous system also halves our intelligence and makes us less able to take in information that's coming in around us, because it really, really just focuses on the danger at hand, and a lot of things just get cleared off the table. And so it's very important that we learn to manage this fact that we've got two, I guess, very different channels that we operate from. And one channel is switched on when we're emotional, and that makes us think very differently than the channel that is switched on when we're feeling calm and we're not emotional. So when we're not feeling emotional, it is really very, very difficult for us to imagine how we're going to be feeling in a situation where our sympathetic nervous system has been triggered. So this again goes back to the tortoise and the hare, is really thinking things through when we're calm, and really having the ability to use hindsight and assess, when was I in that situation before? Is what it is that I'm planning, is that something, how did it make me feel last time I actually did that? Is that something that I really should be trying to do again, or should I maybe be assessing how that turned out and how maybe I need to do things a little bit differently this time? And that's really what a lot of the work is, and the main focus on the work in this unit is about. It's about us learning about ourselves in all different kinds of situations, so we learn better how to predict how we're going to feel and how we might respond when that situation arises again, which to me is really the heart of self-knowledge. The third reason why our emotional system really can go wrong and lead us astray is that we really have such a strong bias about what we think we should feel, and even worse, what we think that other people should feel. That it often really means that we fail to learn about ourselves, and we fail to learn about other people in the situations that we find ourselves in. Anger, for instance, is really considered negative or even evil by some people, and that can then cause them to scaffold guilt onto their anger every time that they feel angry. Now, scaffolding is a concept that we'll learn about a little bit later in this unit, and we can use in a positive manner. But in the case of guilt being scaffolded onto anger, guilt may be useful if we need to learn to regulate our anger better, for sure. But it can be counterproductive if it means that it stops us from paying attention to what our anger is really signaling in us. Having preconceived notions of what we should feel in certain situations can really disrupt our emotional signaling. When my mother died a few years back, for instance, I didn't cry or feel sad in the way that I might have expected. That situation was described in a famous book called The Stranger by Albert Camus, and it was a cause for the central character in the book to actually suffer a fairly major crisis of alienation. In my case, and hopefully because I've taken the time to learn about emotions and also to to learn from them. I was fairly easy on myself about not feeling what I should be feeling in that situation. After watching her suffer a really long and drawn out demise from breast cancer that she suffered, her death at first really was quite a relief for us personally, and also for her empathetically. And then after that, I really needed time to deal with the trauma that I had really witnessed in watching her die from cancer. Now, in relationships, our bias of what people should feel can really do a lot of damage. If you live with a person who's autistic or self-focused, for instance, you may know already that having preconceived ideas about how much empathy that you feel entitled to expect from that person that you live with is really going to leave you disappointed and often feeling quite angry. I would suggest that it's much better if you can learn to predict what's likely to happen in situations that happen regularly day to day, perhaps where you or those people that you live with become emotional. And instead of, putting your bias of what should happen on the situation, learn to predict what is more likely to happen, what reality is, not what you think should happen, and make sure that you have your own interests covered in that situation. And this is going to allow you a much more balanced platform to help model empathy to those same people in a way that you may also end up helping them learn from you. But in the first place, this is about learning about ourselves first, because as you get into the unit work in the beginning of this, we really lay it out and talk about how important that is. We need to understand our own emotions first, certainly before we can help anybody else learn about their emotions and learn how to regulate them better. Empathy is another emotion that a lot of people have a very strong bias towards. It's all great, and the world would be great if we all felt empathy, right? I guess to a degree this is the truth, but really only if you have very strong emotional boundaries. Otherwise, your own emotional balance is really going to be easily knocked over in a lot of situations where that is probably not going to be helpful to you. Seeing and understanding what another person is feeling really can often be a lot more useful than you actually feeling for them, than you actually being captured by or infected by another person's emotion, particularly if those emotions are negative or are very highly charged. Because really emotions are primarily personal signals that really need to be processed by the person who's experiencing the emotion. The person experiencing the emotion has all the data. They're experiencing that emotion for their own reasons, based on their own previous experiences, based on their needs and wants. And someone else interpreting their emotions for them, particularly if they're placing their own bias on what that person should feel, is not only unhelpful, but can also cause a lot of resentment in relationships and can be a really major cause of often people falling out of love, or there being a loss of rapport between people. Now, there's exceptions to this, of course. If a person that we're close to is struggling with an emotion that they're really finding it hard to gain any wisdom from, or they're finding it hard to regulate, there will be situations, with children, for instance, or maybe with our partner, where there is room for us to help coach them. But still, I would say that understanding and compassion, which empathy can give us if we regulate our own empathy, are more important in these situations than us getting too caught up in feeling what the other person is feeling. Because if we allow that to happen, if we allow ourselves to be infected by the emotions of people around us, and we start to try and process those emotions for other people, we start feeling responsible for their unhappiness, for instance, or we start feeling like it's up to us to help calm them down or help them be less angry, rather than just giving them some space to figure that out for themselves. Really, that can create a chain reaction that can really escalate. And then other people can become infected by that emotion as well, to where there's even situations where that can really cause, riots and whole crowds to get out of control in some situations where that goes to an extreme. So that is a little bit different from having an emotional bias, but it's still something that we really need to watch out for. Getting back to emotional biases is having preconceived ideas about what we should feel, and having preconceived ideas about what other people should feel in certain situations. I guess the biggest danger with the second is that it also blinds us to what's really happening. It can really make us not aware of what that person really is feeling, because we're so busy judging that what they're feeling isn't what we expect them to feel. And then we fail to learn and see and interpret correctly for our own best interests, and for the general good of the people around us, what's happening. So that's not emotional intelligence if we're letting our emotional bias influence situations. So a really good starting point with emotional bias is becoming aware of your own bias. That's not an exercise in the unit work below. That's something that I just hope that you'll take away from this tutorial at the beginning. Maybe just have a little bit of a think about your own upbringing and your own ideas about what's right and wrong in terms of feelings, and how that may sometimes cloud your judgment in various situations. And so I wonder, what's the benefit of that? What's the benefit of being honest about what we feel with ourselves, and interpreting honestly what other people are feeling around us? I'll give an example from my life, because I only embarked on this work because I needed it really badly. I was really certainly very emotionally stupid before I started, and I'm still a work in progress. But after years of doing research and learning about myself, Steve and I still fight now and then. And for a long time, that made me feel like I really had no right to be leading other people in this work. For a while, I really felt that, until I examined that as well. And what I came to realize is that when Steve and I fight now, I know exactly why he's angry with me. And I know exactly why I'm angry at him. And even when this is still hard to reconcile, it means that our arguments don't break their banks and end up polluting the rest of what we have that's going well and working well. For us, our fights usually always start around negotiations. I understand now that Steve often feels angry right from the outset when I want something, because he feels that I've got a better vocabulary and I've got better debating skills, and that unless he gets aggressive and uses some emotional manipulation, that he really doesn't stand a chance of resisting where I want to take things. Now, I actually think that that's pretty common with men and women. Most Men, I think, would feel that women have a better vocabulary, especially when it comes to rationalizing what we want and talking about our feelings. And when it comes to interpersonal negotiations, I think a lot of men feel that they're at a bit of a disadvantage, and being gruff and just sort of being a bit pushy and impatient and aggressive. So that's the way that men deal with things. Look, I understand this, but I still won't accept aggression or passive aggression as being an acceptable tool for decision making or planning between Steve and I. And so, that understanding hasn't really led to a perfect solution, but still it's helped, because I've done a lot of work in developing better negotiation processes that we can both use, rather than just jumping in and just it all being convincing for what I want. Is say, okay, how can we get better negotiation processes in place with our family so everybody feels that they're on a more equal footing? And also using my own emotional intelligence. I can see now that if Steve is getting worked up at the outset of a negotiation, that I might really need to give him a little bit of leeway and think through what might be bothering him, before I push too hard for what I want. Which doesn't mean that I just always have to concede to what he wants, but I may really need to use my own empathy skills to sit down and put myself in his shoes and think, okay, why might he be worried about what it is I'm asking for? And just go a little bit more gently and make sure that he feels that he's got a voice or he's got an equal say in the negotiations. For example, this week we had a big deadline to meet, and it's a deadline that I know Steve's taking really seriously. We have to get out of a warehouse that we've had all of our furniture stored in while we were living at the motel, and so it's really it got pretty full of stuff, as can happen. And now that we've moved into a new place and we've got that all set up, we have to get out of the warehouse because we don't need the rest of what's in there. It's something really big that Steve has really taken the lead in managing getting us out of there, and I really appreciate him doing that, and he's taken it really seriously. But see, I want to plan how we tackle that kind of work. It's my stuff in there as well. We really have to think about where it's all going, and I'm someone who wants to be very organized and have a real plan in place for what's going to happen. And Steve understands that as well, of course, but he's more of a mind that he's just, come on, we've just got to get in and we've got to tackle it. And too much talk is just going to slow us down. So knowing our differences and how this kind of situation has really gone bad between us in the past, it really allowed me to choose my battles in that situation a lot more wisely. I got in at the beginning in a really practical way, and I helped Steve first sort things into a system that made me feel better about him moving forward quickly. I set up a table in the warehouse for each of the places where things were going to go, and I labeled them. And I said, let's just really try and sort things, and so everything goes on its own table. And that put the planning in a way that it wasn't just us sitting around a table talking. It was a lot more physical, and Steve felt that we were already making progress. And then after that, I did end up sitting down Steve for the argument that was worth having, that I decided that we needed to have, and that was that we really needed to find the money to pay somebody to help him and allow me to get on with some of my other work, because there was just too much potential for conflict in us working together on that project, because we have quite different styles about how we want to tackle and manage those things. That I'd still help and I'd still be involved, but I really did think that we needed to get somebody else in to help, and that it couldn't just all be on me, and it couldn't be all just on our children, particularly lifting a lot of furniture and whatnot. Now, I didn't actually bring that up very well when I broached that, because I'd been sort of hinting and asking about that for a while, and I was feeling pretty frustrated that Steve had kept brushing me off. But I still pushed through with it because I'd really put the time into deciding that that was something that I needed, that was really important. And I was also ready to help find the money myself. And I did so. And so that cut what could have been a potentially bigger argument off short, because I said, hey, I think we need to do this, but I'm also going to help find the money to do it. So it still caused a bit of an argument, unfortunately. But once the help arrived, everything was back on track pretty quickly. And emotional intelligence really helps with that. I'm reminded of a story as I was just about to go out to an interview the other day, and I had a black dress on, and I needed to fix my shoe with a little bit of glue, and with some shoe glue, and in doing so I got a little tiny bit of just a little tiny bit of glue on the dress that I was wearing. And so fortunately I know about shoe glue, and I've had some experience with it. And so instead of trying to find a solvent and taking the dress off and slowing myself down and creating a situation where I probably would have just impregnated the glue into the fabric in a way that there was a stain there that would probably never come out, I went, okay, I'm just going to leave that there until it dries. And then sure enough, later it just came off really easily without a problem. Didn't slow me down. This is I probably refer to glue maybe a few times in this class work, because I think it's a really good metaphor for emotional intelligence training. In some situations, that wouldn't have been the right thing to do. If it was a different kind of glue or something different that I'd got on my clothing, it may have been really important to take it off and soak it in the right solvent immediately, or the dress would have been ruined. You really need to understand what it is that you're dealing with. And to give a for instance there with emotions, it's like there's some situations where somebody else being angry, particularly if it's not to do with us, is something like the shoe glue that maybe we should just leave alone, and we should just not feel like we've got to smooth it over or help, and just give them the space to deal with that and sort that out for themselves, and stay focused on our own life and just get on with things and not feel like we've got to jump in and fix things for them. And then later on it'll all just blow over and everything's fine, like the glue just coming off easily. Where in other situations where, say, someone is angry at us for something that we've done and we've said, we need to take a completely different response to that, even if we feel like their anger may be unjustified. We just really need to take the time to sit down, listen, pay attention, try and hear it from their point of view, try and take the time to show empathy for what they're feeling, before we just brush them off or jump in and tell them that they're wrong for feeling that. So yeah, this only really comes from experience, us knowing our likely reactions to people, knowing our other people's likely reactions to us, and that's what I'm hoping that we are going to gain from the unit work in this class. So read what's here, work through the exercises, and certainly let's talk about it in the classrooms.